talking with Mike Jolly, who is the longtime lacrosse coach at Warren De La Salle. Mike, maybe you can start with where you started your career. I would appreciate it if you could do that.
Well, as far as the coaching career is concerned, there was almost some great things happened by accident. And I was planning to go into the service after I graduated from high school and did not turn 18 until November. So I'm in limbo after my summer job, which was up north on a farm. Who's going to hire a kid who's 17 years old for a month or two? They're not going to.
You mentioned earlier your dad actually literally rents you out to work farms.
He farmed us out. My brother and I worked on farms in the summer. Before weightlifting, we threw hay bales around and were shocking oats and stuff like that. And the interesting part of that was the first farm where we worked was literally an old-time farm. We did it with horses. We pulled the wagons with horses, we mowed with horses, we raked with horses, and we did have a tractor. The son-in-law had a tractor. He'd come over and bale. So, and I loved that. It was a horse ranch. We had about 20, 30 horses that we would rent out to a boys' camp nearby during the week, and on the weekend, tourists would come by and rent our horses. So to get back to how I got into coaching, I was a person without a job, and I asked our head football coach at Mount Clemens, Steve Nowak, and this will be a consistent theme of people who had a great impact on my life who were coaches, and many are now Hall of Famers, and I'm not sure kids even realize at the time. They're not thinking of, oh, I'm in the presence of a Hall of Fame coach. I'm just in the presence of someone I like, you know, and he seems to like me, and he encourages me to do things, and I pick up my style.
Good teachers.
Yes. You know, I thought of that earlier before you showed up, Greg, that yeah, good coaches are good teachers, and who are my best teachers, many of them happen to be coaches, and they could translate from the field or the court into the room and vice versa. So I ended up as an assistant freshman football coach and basically a gopher, which is a pattern I followed even into college, because at Michigan State, after all this success as a coach, I asked Dick Chapman, another Hall of Famer who was later the head coach at Mount Clemens, what do you think, should I walk on at Michigan State? I had gone out for track at the suggestion of a teammate of mine who I'd met walking across campus. We were conversing. He had to excuse himself and mention that he was going to track practice. And the wheels in my head go, you're running track at Michigan State? I thought Big Ten athletes were Olympians. I mean, I grew up listening to Michigan State, Sam Williams, all these great players who later went to the pros for the Lions and so on. And he said, yeah, do you want to come along? I'll introduce you to the coach. And I said, sure. And Coach Fran Dietrich, who was a grandfather that I never had, my brother and I didn't really, my dad's dad died before my brother was even born, and my mom's dad, they retired to California, so they weren't really a part of our lives. And Fran was wonderful to me, which we'll get to lacrosse later. So I went out for track, got my numerals. Back in those days, you didn't get a letter as a freshman, you got numerals and a numeral sweater, and going, wow. And I never would have gone out for sports at Michigan State, ever. And I've told kids many times now who leave high school, every college team needs depth. You don't have to be a great player to play college sports. If you're a hard worker and a good teammate, kind of like True Wilson this day out at U of M. Coach Verska from our school told True, who walked on at U of M, whatever they want you to do, do it. They need water, get the water. You need a dummy drag, and here now True has become a folk hero out at U of M. Every time he carries the ball, 100,000+ people are going, True, you know, and it's so cool because he's such a great kid himself. But anyway, so my getting back into the coaching, I asked Dick Chapman, I said, so what about football? I made my numerals and track. What do you think about me walking on in football? And he said, go for it. You never know what'll happen. So I through that process met Bert Smith, who later became the athletic director at State. He was my freshman coach, and he understood I was starting a year late because I'd started in January, so the following, I was a freshman who was really a sophomore. He said it'll be tough, but he welcomed me, and I showed up and got my butt kicked on a daily basis. That was the national championship team of '66 with Steve Jude and all those guys. And I was in over my head, but I've never had a regret. But, you know, boy, if I'd have just, I wonder what would have happened if I'd have walked on. Well, I walked on, I learned what happened, but I learned his system, and later he became somewhat of a mentor to me because I became a grad assistant at Michigan State. So my first career path was to be a college football coach. And in 1965, I was back. I coached at Mount Clemens for a couple of years in the fall. That's how I paid for college. I went to school winter, spring, summer, coached and substitute taught in the fall. So I thought that was good money, easy money, compared to what I was used to doing. And I was at Chippewa Valley and all set to go back to Michigan State in the fall as a grad assistant, and the freshman coach there got mono, Ken O'Brien, and they needed a freshman coach. Just cover, please, until he can recover. So I did, and I loved it. And I called up to State, and Duffy Doherty was the head coach back then, and just informed him that I was going to stay at Chippewa Valley. It was no great loss for Michigan State. I was there learning. I wasn't there contributing all that much. But I stayed. We went undefeated. Ken O'Brien, the coach designated as head coach, I became fast friends. Ken later was, well, we hired him here when I was AD. They won a couple state championships in bowling. He's an incredible bowler. And that began my coaching career. I discovered I loved coaching kids, and seemed to have a knack for it. So that's how I got into coaching. So it was something I just think's meant to be.
Okay. Know. Where did lacrosse sneak in?
Well, as I mentioned, I walked on in track at Michigan State and continued to run track. And I was a half miler, 440 half miler, but basically a half miler. And we were loaded with great half milers at Michigan State back then. And that's when the state had a public school champion, a Catholic school champion, and they didn't compete against each other. And so Fran Dittrich, who was the head coach at State, suggested, just so I could get some more competition, to switch to, you know, not to switch, but add javelin, throwing javelin to my resume. So I did, and Fran was a field event man himself, although not anywhere near my stature, but he was a very good athlete, and I had mentioned a wonderful person, the grandfather that I had never had. So he gave me a couple javelins, and he showed me what to do, and I was throwing javelin, which there are two events a year. Notre Dame also threw javelin, so I'd compete against Notre Dame, and the IC4A. Those would be the only two that I'd compete in. Well, I was still living in the dorms, and a kid named Bud Schultz, a lifelong friend, but at the time, this kid from Rochester, New York. So you can now say, okay, here's where lacrosse comes in. They were starting lacrosse at Michigan State. A kid named Bruce Goodwin from Friends School in Baltimore, Bud Schultz from Irondequoit in Rochester, and Dave Wagner, who had played a year at OWU and then transferred to Michigan State. He was from Long Island. You know, three somewhat hotbeds: Baltimore, Long Island, upstate New York. And
especially in those days.
Oh yeah. And Bud, he was both in where I lived in the dorm, but we were also pledge brothers. And of course he had his stick out, you know, doing all the things that are done with sticks. And I've always said that there's something fascinating about a kid with a stick and a ball. Whether it's you with it or you watching somebody do something, they say, how hard is that? And of course they were recruiting, and I was a track man, and they were taking anybody. And he kept encouraging me to come out, so I was doing both. I would do my track practice, which is kind of on my own terms because I was a javelin thrower with just one other javelin thrower doing it with me, and then I'd go to lacrosse practice. So I was doing both until we were throwing against Notre Dame in track, and we're playing Ohio State's junior varsity in lacrosse. Same day, same time, different locations. I couldn't do both. And I weighed how much I enjoyed either. I went and talked to Coach Dittrich. He thanked me for letting him know, and I put track in my rear view mirror and switched to lacrosse. So my first game was against Ohio State's junior varsity as a defenseman, which was humorous, I'm sure.
At the time, you were better at track than lacrosse, though, correct?
Oh,
I mean,
I was horrible at lacrosse.
Okay.
I mean, I'm a neophyte.
It showed
scooping, throwing, catching.
Right.
But I could run the ball out. I mean,
right, but leaving a sport you have some efficiency at to go to one where you're less efficient, obviously is a great love of the sport.
And I think you're attracted by personality. I think there are people who enjoy being part of a team. Not that our track team wasn't a team. I still am good friends with Bob Fulcher and Bill Beatty and others on that team. But I enjoyed the basketball, the football, the team sport, and the horizon wasn't real bright. I wasn't setting any records throwing javelin, although I loved it. It's one of the artistic sports like punting. You know, you get off a good throw, and it's a beautiful thing to see, I think. So that was in 1963. That was the first team ever at Michigan State. And I continued to play at Michigan State until it went varsity, at which time I was no longer eligible. And Uncle Sam had orders for me anyway to go on active duty. So I went my bachelor's, my master's, and then went on active duty and then came back. But loved lacrosse, changed my life.
So you were ROTC at Michigan State?
I was. And I had to deal with them. They would train me to fly an airplane, and I owed them X number of years of my life, and I go, what a great deal.
Play any lacrosse post-collegiate?
Yes. Back then, the Midwest League was a combination of colleges and city club teams. Like Cleveland has had a long existing club program, Columbus, Chicago areas. And then we had Michigan State, Michigan. We were the two clubs in Michigan, but well, Kenyon was a varsity sport. Denison, with the great Tommy Thompson who coached there, they were the power in the Midwest. Notre Dame had a club sport back then. They were my favorites to go play, not just because Michigan State, Notre Dame, and that tradition, but it was different back then. We were friends off the field.
Right.
We were friends with the players, and you go to Cleveland, they throw a barbecue for you after the game in Chagrin Falls that would, rival any in the country. I mean, they treated, there was great camaraderie back then.
Do you think that was because it was such a small fraternity?
I think so. It still is. To a degree, I keep telling kids it's a small world.
It is.
Wherever you go, take your stick with you. If you're on a beach in Florida, even if there's no one to play catch with, just go down the beach. Somebody will come up to you and say, oh, you play lacrosse. I go to Florida now and I'll see kids playing on the beach, throwing and catching. And they're not brothers, they just became friends.
I was on campus at Notre Dame Saturday to see a niece, just visiting. I'm walking across campus, I run into Jerry Byrne, who's the defensive coordinator from Notre Dame.
Great coach.
So we had a long conversation. I've gone for years to their camps. I know Jerry very well.
The best
Jerry says,
instructional camps around.
do you want to go to the hockey game tonight? What are you doing tonight? You want to take us to the hockey game? Sure. So we went to the Notre Dame, Michigan, Ohio State hockey game. We had no intention of staying, but free tickets, we had good seats. It was really fun. So it really is a small world. It really is a small world.
We stayed down. We would stay down there after games because back then, hey, the Kingston Trio has a concert here. Do you want to go? So, and we lived in the dorms. When we came down, it was like a road trip. You get some seedy motel and you pack 6 guys in a room, you take the mattresses off the beds. I mean, it was, our team was very close just because of those kind of experiences. Or we'd stay in the halls at Notre Dame, much appreciating Michigan State because they had hours, and they had hours on at Michigan State, boys didn't have hours. The girls had hours. They had to be in their dorms at 11 o'clock.
When you say hours, you should mention curfew.
Yeah, curfew, yeah. And they had classes Saturday morning until noon, and they had security guards at their dorms, and we had to be in. If we were sleeping in their room, like I had a good friend, Jim Dixon, who was from Syracuse, played for Notre Dame, and he was also ROTC, so we had a number of connections, and we had to be in. And the uniformed policeman was at that door, and going to the games, so we'd get dressed and we'd walk from where we dressed out to the field, and we'd be walking by the dorms, and all these guys after 5.5 days of classes were back in their rooms because we played early in the afternoon, getting the cat calls that Michigan State sucks and we're going to kick your ass and all that stuff. But it was great. It was a healthy rivalry.
Sure.
And it wasn't
so
nasty.
From post-collegiate, kind of maybe wind your way into where does high school come in?
Okay. Well, I was playing for Detroit Windsor. That was the only local club team, unless you wanted to go across to Canada. But then they combined to Detroit Windsor. And Rob Ambrose, I was coaching. I'll just condense my football career to I was the head coach at Chippewa Valley following being an assistant football coach here. Had early success. Later we struggled because for various reasons. Some of them mine, and some of them losing junior high, losing freshman program, and that affects the program too. So John Morano, who is the coach here, said, come on back to De La Salle. So I came down here to interviewed with Gary Buslip, great coach, I think. And I had it with football at the time. It was one of those things. I don't hate football, but the experience out there was not a pleasant one when I left. So I came here as a basketball assistant coach, had freshman for a couple of years, moved up to varsity, and when I was 82, so I was still freshman coach. Rob Ambrose from Rice, who had started the program there the year before, came over here, talked to Gary, and said, De La Salle should really have lacrosse here. Totally unknown to me. So Rob Ambrose really, his fingerprints are all over our program because he was the one who talked to the administration, and being Gary's assistant, he knew I was playing for Detroit, and he said, would I be interested in starting lacrosse here? I said, I'd love to start lacrosse here. And we started with freshmen and sophomores. I wouldn't do that way again. I thought a kid needs 2 years to become decent at it. I should have taken juniors, and I had juniors just begging, please, won't you let us come out? And these are basketball players who I had had before, and I go, I just really think we'll start with freshmen and sophomores. Intending just to teach them the sport the first year, and the league of, how many teams do we have back there, 10, 12, yeah. Something like that. Oh, you got to play some games. So we scheduled 3 games. We ended up 2-1. My sophomores and freshmen, thank God we were able to beat Sorrows. That's a great school program by 1 goal or something like that. And the next year the thought was, okay, we'll play a JV schedule. Oh, no, you got to play a varsity schedule. So we played a varsity schedule with freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. Got it handed to us. There were good teams back there. And then our first year, well, Ken Mhslca well, you and he are good friends. Ken was our captain that year, and it's from then, it took us 5 years to get to the semifinals, to the Final Four. That was one of our goals, and it took us 10 years to win a state championship. So, but the program built and built through. Well, the kids loved playing it. It kind of sold itself once we got going. And Gary was very good. That first year, everybody got a JV letter.
L'Anse Creuse was the first high school to have a program
that lasted.
Right.
That lasted.
Right, and I want to say 1976 is their first year.
Pretty close.
And so now you take it through, as you're beginning, you guys began here in '82. Now you come to the late '80s. The Mhslca was the governing body at the time.
Yeah, we governed ourselves, which did a pretty good job at it. I laughed when you brought that up about L'Anse Creuse, because in 1965 at Chippewa Valley, there's a lacrosse club in the yearbook. I started a lacrosse club there when I went there to coach football as a freshman coach. And I had a great group of kids who I knew as students in the school. They did all this fundraising and stuff like that. Well, I went back to college in January, and the kids took the money that they raised and went to Florida for spring break. The club never got going. Ray Evans, he was the kind of, not the ringleader of that, but I still remember those kids. Yeah, I brought some sticks and we showed them how to throw and catch, but it didn't last.
Right.
Don Lutz's group at L'Anse Creuse last, which, and to this day, but I kind of smile. We had great competition, well, great rivalries is the better word, with Brother Rice, CC, Cranbrook, everybody west of Woodward. And L'Anse Creuse, I think they liked having east of Woodward as their territory. You know, they were the king of this side of that dividing line. And when we came into the picture, it was grudging acceptance from L'Anse Creuse. It's when schools are close to each other, the rivalries sometimes aren't the best. You know, like us in Notre Dame. When Notre Dame, I mean, it was a great rivalry. But as an administrator, I hated the Notre Dame games because they were a little nasty.
Okay.
Kids who wanted to go to the one school or the other and didn't get in, you know, they harbored that rejection and so on. And so I had to put extra police on it. But I love playing CC, Cranbrook, the other side, the west side, so to speak. But we were talking about the Mhslca. You were asking about
that group of teams, that original group of 10, 12, 14 teams, kind of had it to themselves for probably 8 to 10 years, 12 years. Yeah. And then slowly the sport, as it started to grow, started to come, Mhslca expanded. What did you notice about that original group that maybe 5 years into as it started to expand? Was there any changes? Was there anything different?
The West Siders, those west of Woodward, which were primarily Brother Rice, CC, Cranbrook, Country Day. They were the elite teams in the state. The rest of us were not Johnny-come-latelys, but we literally, as a playing level, we weren't in their league, so to speak, even though we're all one league. So one of the things that L'Anse Creuse and the other schools agreed on, we never got all league, we never got all American, we never got all state, and our kids perhaps didn't deserve it based on their skill, but they were hardworking kids and so on. So we came up with, we called ourselves the East Division. And we said, heck with them, we'll give our own awards to our kids, you know. So our kids felt good at the end of the season if they made all division or won this division. But then over time, you know, with other teams that were added, well, Liggett was on this side also, and they were a good program. They've even before John Fowler, but John Fowler established a very good program there. They were one of the better teams. They just didn't have the numbers. I mean, even today they have, what, 237 kids, and they're in Division II trying to compete against a school like us with, when you double our enrollment, 1,400 kids. Like, what are the chances? You know, slim. But yeah, the MHSAA finally, I guess, looked at us and said, well, there's a lot of teams playing lacrosse. We better get involved. And before that, it was great. What we did as the Mhslca, we followed all MHSAA rules regarding eligibility, so on and so forth, except travel distance.
Right.
That's so we, unlike, and it wasn't unfair to the other teams. The baseball teams had their restrictions; they had to live with it, and the lacrosse teams, oh man, to St. Louis, Missouri, or Baltimore, or North Carolina, and it was a great team building experience for during spring break. And I still wish that they would allow teams over a spring break on a non-school night to travel further than that distance. But I understand that some schools can't afford to do that. I mean, then there's an equity that the MHSA has in mind, and it's a fight not worth fighting. We don't have to travel far to get our butt kicked. There are good competition in the area.
Did the MHSA approach the MSLA or vice versa, or was it a mutual coming together? I've heard different versions of what was.
Boy, that's an interesting, and this could follow, if we follow footprints or a blood trail, it may have followed Tom Rashid, because Tom was director of the Catholic League, and he, hence, as we know, went to the MHSAA. So he had experience with lacrosse programs. They ran a lacrosse, a two-division lacrosse championship. And we talked rules all the time with Tom of what we did and what the MHSAA. I said, well, we're not the MHSAA, we're the MSLA, and we follow all the rules except travel. And numbers, how many you could work with in the off season. We said, hey, if the kid's not out for another sport, he might as well be working with us. So we didn't have the limit of 4 or whatever it is these days, 4 or 5. So maybe when he got to MHSA, I don't know, I'd have to look at a calendar. That's an interesting timeline to
because I've heard different versions. That's why I was asking.
Put it this way. We weren't all excited about MHSA taking us over. We liked what we were doing.
Right.
But I think administrators feel more comfortable if this MHSAA governing body, voluntarily entered by the high schools, would include us and other sports. So I don't know.
Do you have a thought in your head about what the difference, not just organizationally, but you went MSLA, now we're MHSAA. Do you have the thoughts or ideas as to what you think is and not good or bad, just maybe different?
No. Well, as you can imagine, Greg, the MSLA was very coach-oriented. It was run by coaches. Our officers were coaches. Our bylaws were written by coaches. So things that appealed to coaches, like being able to travel further or being able to work with more kids, were included in ours. So I'm sure the coaches felt much more, I don't know if engaged, we were more engaged because we were MSLA, but also appreciated, listened to, or whatever. Because, I mean, all the different constituencies, players, parents, coaches, governing body, I mean, I'm sure they all have their own view of things. And of course, we were concerned about the parents' view, because that's how we get our players if we're not doing things safely and right. But we didn't have to worry about, well, geographically, it was pretty much southeastern Michigan. With Tom Mitchell had started the program over at East Grand Rapids, and there was that hotbed of Forest Hills, Central East Grand Rapids over in the west side. And then there is this little budding in Lansing, with Lansing Waverly, and of course Ann Arbor, which expanded to Ann Arbor, Panera. But the majority was in southeastern Michigan. So we're definitely a lower peninsula horizontally, and skewed way to the east side, to the Detroit area. That's where things were. So
could the MSLA have handled the expansion and the growth without the structure of the MHSA? As we know it today.
Boy, it would have, you know, for coaches who were also officers and administrators and then coaching their own team.
Right.
Even today, I think it's, well, take a look at All-America or even All-State voting. How can coaches cast an intelligent vote for a list of a ballot that includes 50, 60? Back in the old days, we all knew each other's players. We played everybody twice and then 3 times if you played them in the playoffs. We knew who the great players were. And although we didn't have as many as today, we had some great players that went on to play at Hopkins and Penn and Princeton, and I mean, they went out east. They weren't just, and Michigan State had a top 20 D1 program back then too. So it was much more.
If I'm not mistaken, Michigan State's last game was actually an NCAA tournament game.
Yeah, the Syracuse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was, my son played on that, and then he was an assistant coach in '97 when they yanked I was just reading some articles this morning about the Title IX and gender equity, and the Title IX never meant just gender equity. It had other ramifications, but Michigan State chose to. That was a sad time for Michigan lacrosse, for Michigan high school lacrosse, because our kids, they go to Michigan and play. And Michigan had a good club program back then, and Michigan State was a D1 program. It was the only D1 program in the state. Ron Hebert had Northwood, which was a D2 program. And those were the only two varsity programs, I think.
Rich Kimball had the East Michigan State team.
Yes.
What have you noticed the difference between what was late 80s to maybe, not maybe now in the last couple years, but in your heyday of maybe the late 90s and the early 2000s, you had some pretty good teams.
Yes. Oh, you mean generally?
Generally,
in the
but
state.
in terms of in the growth period of that 15 years, as MHSA has taken over, is there noticeable differences to you? Expansion is one of those, obviously.
Yeah, it's hard to, if we talk governing and how the sport is constituted statewide, of course now we have teams in Traverse City and what's the other community just around the bay and up from them?
Petoskey.
Pardon me?
Petoskey.
Petoskey, yeah. So it's spread further northward, southwest, South Haven, southeast of Tecumseh. I mean, we're even more spread out. The quality, sometimes us old timers think that the quality of lacrosse may have been better, but then we start talking about kids. They're bigger, they're faster, they're starting their training earlier. They do things with their sticks these days that, would have been jaw-dropping 20 years ago. And so I think the game, I think it's faster. I think it's better. I think we have a better game, and that's from a guy who loved the old game, which was it was more physical, but no coach, nobody, no parent, no coach, no admin wants to see a kid get hurt. So I think these points of emphasis, like head and neck checks, spearing, that kind of, I think that's all good. That's an improvement. But I don't sense the camaraderie among the coaches that we used to have. Because we're such a small, intimate group. Now it's a huge group, and even when we try to have those socials, that Brian Kaminskas puts together and Adam Vincent over on the west side, and even coaching clinics. To try to put a coaching clinic together now with all these teams and with all this other stuff going on, but that's not the game. That's what's surrounding the game now. What's surrounding the game now is a lot of money, and I think that has hurt the quality of the game, because I think a lot of teams in the off season, and some do get good coaching, no question about it. But I think there's a lot of teams where the quote coaches are pretty much supervisors. They're just shoveling lines in and out. I've gone to the tournaments and I particularly watch who our kids are playing for, what coaches. And sometimes I'm pleased, and sometimes I'm going, come on, coach these kids. The kid just screwed up, you're angry with him, tell him. But no, they rotate them out, they collect their money, big money,
yes,
for doing these tournaments. And that's the big change. You and I and others, what we did with kids, we did for the kids. And we weren't trying to, that wasn't a career for us. Our career was teaching, coaching, or whatever. And That's the big change. And I don't see college coaches talking to high school coaches a whole lot, because they have their exposure camps. They have, they go to the kids' travel coach. That's the way it is out in Colorado, where my grandson plays. He plays high school ball out there, but he plays for Jamie Monroe's 3D teams out there. And the high school coach really isn't part of the picture where we used to be. Right.
Let me back up and ask, if you had to tell one story, if I said to you, tell me a story that makes you happy and makes your heart happy about De La Salle. Do you have one or two of those stories?
Countless.
I'm sure you have countless, but there's got to be one or two.
Yeah, and this may sound nepotistic. It had to do with my son Doug, who he's the youngest of 7 boys. So he's a pretty tough kid because he had 6 older brothers pounding on him all the time. And he came to De La Salle, went out for football, and where he went to grade school, St. Thecla. They didn't have a football program. So he was new at it, didn't get a lot of playing time, tried out for basketball, and I was an assistant basketball coach prior to his coming here. And he got cut. Tears of anger, tears of upset. Because he had been the little rat rug around here when I would come down. Coach, he'd come with me. Mike Poplowski would carry him around on his shoulders. Doug really wanted to play basketball badly, but we have really high quality programs here. It's hard to make baseball here. It's hard to make basketball. Frankly, that's why Rob Ambrose's pitch went so well. We have all these baseball kids who got cut. Major leaguers. They've been future major leaguers all their lives. They were the all-stars from every little league and fed team around, and they get cut. And we had all these long faces walking around in the spring, and our principal, Brother Kevin, said, we got to get something else for these kids to do besides track. And we talked about personalities. Baseball kids don't naturally migrate to track. They either play baseball or what do they do? So we established lacrosse to get those kids involved. Well, Doug, as a 6th grader, and I'd been playing lacrosse all the time. My older boys would accompany me to the Detroit-Windsor game. So I asked Doug if he'd go to a camp. So as a 6th grader, he goes to the Cranbrook camp. 3 great coaches. Tom Gracer, who I think is incredible, Rich Kimball, and Ron Hebert. And fortunately, Ron didn't teach Doug the lower hand cradle. Teaching other stuff, but and my son loved Ron Hebert. So after 2 days, he said, "Dad, this is a dumb game. I hate this game." And I go, "Well, we've paid for a whole week." I said, "Finish the week, and that's it, because I want you to finish what you start." And at the time we talked about it, he was pretty excited. He finished the week, put his stick in the closet, and it stayed there until his 9th grade here. And he didn't play much in football, got cut from basketball, and he's no baseball player. So he goes out for lacrosse and makes the team as a kid who literally has virtually never played before. He's seen it. And I was coaching. I'm the varsity coach. He's on the freshman team. And I'm watching the freshman game. And the game went into overtime, and after the game, he's in tears. Different kind of tears from being cut. Tears of emotional joy. Unknown to me, because during the first part of the game, I was still coaching. Doug scored the first goal, and his coach was Brother Richard Galvin, who had never coached lacrosse. Who can teach here? You can teach, then you can coach. And I taught Brother Richard, and he scored the first goal, the tying goal, and the goal that won in overtime. And for the first time in his life, he had done something that his older brothers had never done. Whatever he did before, he was never the first to drive, he was never the first to go out on a date, it was like, but he finally got his 6, he's one up on his 6 older brothers, and he was so happy, and he was hooked. Once that happened, he became a fanatic. And people say, "Oh, well, you must have taught him all this stuff." I didn't bring him up as a sophomore. He stayed at the JV. Steve Hubble was his coach. They went undefeated, won the JV state championship that we had back then. And Doug built his own backboard in the backyard, went on to play at Michigan State, and had a great career. Being coached by Rich Kimball from the 6th grade experience that he hated, you know, Tom Gracer, you know, who he played against many times, and Ron Hebert, who had stayed a part of Doug's life for that. So as a parent, that was extremely gratifying, but as a coach, it's also, if a kid can have some success, you know, it's just, he's hooked. You know?
Could you separate yourself from coach to dad?
No, and nor could Doug. Here's how we worked it. I kept Doug as far away from me as I could. It's tough enough at Chippewa, my 6 older boys, and I was teaching and coaching at Chippewa. We were there together, which was kind of fun. And did I coach them? Yeah, I coached some of them. I cut one of them. Talk about a long face. I got to look at that long face for the whole season. But I kept that son, Joe, in baseball as a freshman. And you only kept cut, you know, that needling, your dad's the coach. As a JV, I cut him because he wasn't, he was a decent basketball player, but he wasn't as good as what I had. And then he later went on in baseball to set some school records as a pitcher, so, which is not what he was when I was coaching him. So in Doug's case, I wanted Steve Hubble to coach him. Steve is a wonderful coach. And they were having a great experience, and I brought up a kid named Chuck Ferris. I needed a player, but I needed a defensive player, and Doug was offense. And had I brought him up, he wouldn't have had that undefeated state championship experience. As a junior, Ken Mhslca did all the, if I got angry with Doug, he would take it personally. Whereas most kids, well, his dad, you know, I mean, and Doug and I had a close relationship. So if I was disappointed with him, it hurt his feelings. You know, he could not separate, and I was seeing that he was taking personally what I was saying correctively. So if it was praise, I lavished it. when it was something that I was not happy with, Ken did it. And Doug took it from Ken like he did all his other coaches perfectly. So Ken was my bag man. He was.
Before we get to equipment, can you prognosticate a little bit, maybe 5-6 years out, with just what's your thoughts on where we are at the moment and where we might be headed? And if you don't have an answer, right, that's fine.
Yeah, it's a dilemma, because we have now, what, 120, 130 programs.
129.
And they're growing.
Yes.
It's not going to go
7
down.
more this year.
We have, I'm trying to think if we ever lost a high school program once it started in the Mhslca era.
We're close this year.
Say again?
We're close this year.
Oh, okay.
We're going to lose Huron in Ann Arbor.
Oh, man.
They
used to be
very good team.
Power. Yeah. Oh, that's unfortunate.
That's speculation.
But the idea is we're growing, and we're going to continue to grow. I mean, nationally, internationally, it's going to.
But the USL tells us that the numbers at this point have peaked. 2014.
Really?
The numbers for lacrosse have peaked, and
for boys.
Well, the
girls.
Federation keeps track of numbers.
Yeah.
Growth numbers. Anything over 10% is considered to be way beyond normal. Anything 10% and under is considered to be part of the sport because they lose 10%. So if they're going at 10%, they're still losing. So it's sort of, we're past the point of that rapid growth that they use for their formula. So there's only a certain number of players left. And if you look at the MIAA, if you look at the MIAA 5 years ago, every team had 30, 35 kids on it. There's teams in the MIAA now, they have 16, 17 kids on the roster. Because everybody's started a lacrosse program. And there's only so many kids,
exactly,
and there's twice the programs. Well, there's got to be a give somewhere, and it turns out they're kids that might have wanted to go play at a small school like Adrian, who have to pay 40 grand because there's no help, are now saying, to heck with it, I'll go play for a good club program like Michigan State, like Central, Western. They pay $1,000, $1,500, they get to play, walk around with a jacket, and they're going to the school that they wanted to go academically, because maybe Adrian didn't offer this. And I think that really has flipped. I really believe that that's flipped a lot.
Yeah, that's, I hadn't heard those stats. I have no reason to even question those. They make sense.
Yeah.
That there's only X amount of players available. And
So I wonder where we're headed with this sport. I think it's growing because we have more kids that want to play, but what are the opportunities if you can't?
Well, where are the officials?
Yes, that's the other part.
Where are the coaches?
And,
And that's, we used to say that all the time, always encouraging our players to come back and keep giving, but it's like there's a talent pool of anything, players, coaches, officials, and what kind of officiating are we getting? What kind of coaching are we getting? What kind of, yeah, so that doesn't necessarily put a ceiling on the growth, but it puts a ceiling on the quality.
Right.
And that when it grows past that, when these kids don't just get simple fundamentals, that's all we ever wanted here at this school as freshmen: scoop, throw, catch, play defense, just teach the basic fundamentals. That if you're doing those, the game will take care of itself. Right. It's a simple game.
Right.
It's not complex. This is the legendary bucket. These helmets were called buckets. Like it was actually two sizes fitted all. There was a small size and a larger size, and any adjustments in head size was accommodated by laces in the back. So you'd put your helmet on, you'd snug the laces, and basically, and this is a back rack. Back rack racing back then was one of the primary helmet makers, and gloves. Back rack was a business in Baltimore.
And I point out that helmet isn't really that old. It's not. I mean, it looks like it might have been used by New Rockney, but I mean, yeah. Those kind of helmets were used relatively
We started here in the 80s.
Yeah. So I mean,
we all wore buckets.
Yeah.
The modern helmet did not come in, and if somebody really winged a shot, I had this happen once, the ball will fit between there. It will squeeze. And I can't remember what team. I'd like to think it was Notre Dame, and I think it was, because it was a night game, and that's one of the few night games we played. One of their kids just rocketed a shot, and I was playing on his stick, and it went through my mask. Fortunately, the mask slowed it down. It didn't injure me at all, but here's the ball, bouncing around inside of here. The official had to stop playing. We got it out. But these, as for both, they're only to protect you from the inadvertent stick. It's not a football helmet. It's, God help us, and even back in the old days in the football helmets, they had, remember the donut they called it, which were horrible helmets. Everybody's worried about protocol for concussion. I'm amazed that back in the 50s, well, they were teaching different techniques in football. So this is the helmet from which I wore in the 60s through the 80s when I played for Detroit Windsor, and I keep it to show kids, to amuse them. This isn't even the most recent, but all of a sudden back rack raising helmets, the helmet industry has totally changed because of liability insurance. And Cascade, would you still consider, is Cascade a primary maker these days?
Yeah.
A much different helmet with inserts. I didn't bring a pack of it, 2 or 3 different inserts for a better fit. Great cushioning in here. This happens to be a goalie's helmet. They never had anything that looked like this. They just had a kind of a rectangle foam that hung down. But that's one area that the equipment has changed markedly. Well, it's changed everywhere. Between the game when I first started playing and today, when we looked at helmets, and if you take a look at the sticks, and I look at the game as it was played in my time, what a difference between the two. This is the wood stick with the gut wall and the leather, what would once been called a traditional pocket. And back in that day, this was your stick and your stick only. You never lent your stick to anybody else because each stick was so individual and you had to learn to adapt that stick to you and vice versa, so to speak. Whereas today, this stick with this nice deep pocket that you don't have to, at the end of every practice, you'd have to take the tension off this stick to let it recover, and then when practice or a game started, you tighten it back up like stringing a bow. These sticks these days with the composition heads, composition shafts, mesh pockets, kids today, players today can do wonderful things that we would never have thought about. And they can throw checks both ways, whereas we were talking about lacquering this side, Greg. As a defenseman, if I'm playing a right-hander and he's coming around from behind, I would have my stick like this. If I didn't switch hands, or I did, if he's coming the other way, I'd roll my stick so I could get the wood on him. So our basic checks were poke checks and slap checks with the wood. But today, oh my gosh, Dave Petramala has more checks when he was a player, and he had them all cataloged with various nicknames, TikTok and Windmill and all this kind of stuff. And never thought about it.
In your mind, is it easier to catch with a new stick or an old stick?
Oh, the new stick. We have our kids, I'll give a demonstration, I'll throw me a pass, and I just drop, when the ball hits it, I drop it. I said, the stick will catch itself. You don't have to snap at it. You don't, just give with it. The stick will catch by itself. So and with just that little movement, the ball's in there. And in the state championship game, James Brunk, he was the MVP of that game in '94, had his stick called as an illegal stick. And James did a lot of the stringing for everybody on the team. He borrowed Brian Johannes' stick, and it was like he didn't miss a beat. They were so uniform. And if anybody stepped on your stick, like in a game, that was fighting. Nobody stepped on or tried to break another person's stick. And even if you're best friends, can I borrow your stick? You'd say, no. Well, your best friend wouldn't ask. He'd know that the answer is no, because that's your unique stick. So.
Lacrosse subtlety that doesn't exist anymore. All right. Well, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I appreciate it very much.
Hey, I enjoyed it very much myself, Greg, and spending time with you, seriously. So thank you.